Have you ever walked into a mentorship session feeling like you needed to have everything perfectly planned out? Like if you just prepared enough, picked the right activity, thought through every possible outcome, then the session would go smoothly and you'd feel confident as a mentor. I think a lot of mentors feel that way, especially when they're working with kids who have experienced foster care, adoption, abuse, neglect, or developmental trauma. There's this pressure to get it right? To not mess up, to create the perfect experience for the child. And listen, preparation matters, training matters. That's why that's part of our program. Structure matters. At Stable Moments, we absolutely believe in intentional sessions and thoughtful planning. But today I want to talk to you about something that I actually think matters more than perfect preparation, and that's being trauma responsive. Because mentorship sessions are going to surprise you. The activity that you thought that they would love might completely flop. A child may come in upset, withdrawn, distracted, angry, hyper, shut down, or unwilling to engage at all. Plans will change. Emotions will show up. Unexpected moments will happen. And if our confidence as mentors is built only in things going according to plan, we are going to struggle. But if our confidence is built on our ability to stay open and flexible and connected and curious and responsive inside the relationship, then suddenly those moments stop feeling like failures and they start becoming opportunities. Honestly, some of the most important moments in our mentorship are the ones that you never could have planned for. So today we're talking about what it actually means to be trauma responsive, why it matters so much for children who have experienced developmental trauma, and how mentors can stop putting pressure on themselves to be perfect and instead focus on building safe, connected relationships. I'm going to roll that intro and then we will dive right in. I'm Rebecca Britt, and this is the Stable Moments podcast. I started this podcast to understand from all perspectives how we can help end the foster care crisis. The overwhelming response was we need to support our local community. Unwanted, abandoned, orphaned children are the community's responsibility. We must support, guide, love, invest, raise up generations that will nurture, love, and support their own children to end this crisis. So the purpose of this podcast is to build an army of people that are interested and willing to take responsibility of our foster youth and who are supportive of foster and adoptive families. This is the on-ramp for people who want to get involved but might not know where to start. I want this to be a place where community members feel like they can make a difference, where they feel good enough to make that difference, and believe that they can be a big deal in the life of a child. Thanks for being part of our community, and make sure to join the conversation in the Stable Moments podcast Facebook group. Together, we can end the foster care crisis. Welcome to the Stable Moments podcast. If you are wanting to learn more about our model, please go on over and watch our free webinar on building life skills through community mentorship at stablemoments.com/webinar. Okay, so today we're talking about being trauma responsive in mentorship and why responsiveness is really what matters more than getting everything right. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions mentors have is that successful mentorship comes from having the perfect session plan. And honestly, I understand why people think that. We naturally feel safer when we feel prepared. If I have the right activity, if I have backup activities, if I know exactly what to say, if I avoid awkward moments, then the session will go well. But trauma-informed mentorship isn't about controlling the environment. So nothing difficult happens. It's about learning how to stay connected when difficult things do happen. That's the work. And honestly, that's life too. Because healthy adults aren't people who always get it right? Healthy adults are people who know how to adjust, repair, regulate, problem solve, stay humble, and keep moving forward when things don't go according to plan. And that's what we're modeling for kids. So what actually does it mean to be trauma responsive? I think sometimes people hear the phrase trauma responsive and think it means having the perfect response to trauma. Like, I need to know exactly what to say. I need special psychology skills. I need to know how to handle every situation. And honestly, that's not what I mean at all. Being trauma responsive is much more relational than that to me. It's the ability to stay present enough to observe what's happening in real time, get curious about it, make a choice, see how the child responds, and then adjust from there. It's a dance. You observe, you get curious, you make a choice. You observe again. You get more information, you adjust. That's responsiveness. And honestly, that's what healthy relationships look like in general. The problem is many adults, especially adults who are anxious about doing it right, walk into sessions trying to control the experience instead of participating in the relationship. But trauma responsive mentorship is much more fluid than that. You're not executing a perfect performance. You're engaging with a real human being, and human beings are constantly giving us information, right? Their energy gives us information. Their body language gives us information. Their engagement gives us information. Their frustration gives us information. Their silence gives us information. So instead of rigidly sticking to the original plan, trauma responsive mentors stay observant. For example, maybe a child walks into the session unusually quiet for them, and a rigid mindset would say, okay, let's get this activity started. And a responsive mindset pauses and notices, their energy feels a little different today. Now, maybe you ask to slow down. Maybe you ask more gently how their week was. Maybe you realize they need connection before structure today. Or maybe you planned an activity that requires focus and patience, but the child is bouncing off the walls. So instead of thinking they're being difficult, you might think, or trying to make them do this activity, you might think, interesting, their nervous system feels really activated today. Now, maybe instead of forcing this work, you pivot to something else, maybe with something with movement. Maybe you start shooting hoops, okay? That's responsiveness. And here's the important part. You do not always need to know the right answer immediately. That's okay, because the process itself is the model. You try something, you observe, you gather information, you adjust. That's what emotionally healthy adults do. And honestly, this is one of the greatest gifts we can give kids who have experienced developmental trauma, because many of them grew up around adults who were reactive instead of responsive, adults whose emotions controlled the room, adults who escalated quickly, adults who became punitive, rejecting, emotionally unavailable when things didn't go smoothly. So when a mentor can stay calm and curious instead of controlling, the child experiences something very different. They experience, I don't have to perform perfectly to stay connected. This adult can handle uncertainty. This relationship has flexibility. We together can figure things out. That's powerful. That is what helps, okay? That's what helps mentors stop fearing imperfection so much. So sessions are not about proving you're a good mentor. The sessions become information gathering. That's all they are. You're learning. What helps this child regulate? What shuts them down? What lights them up? What feels overwhelming? What helps them feel successful? How do they respond to encouragement? How do they respond to frustration? That curiosity changes everything. Honestly, some of the best mentorship moments come from things not according to plan, because now you and the child are figuring something out together in real time. And every time you do that, you build another layer of trust, confidence, and relational safety. And this is especially important for kids who have experienced developmental trauma, because so much of their early life may have been shaped by unpredictability, survival, fear, or adults that respond harshly when things go wrong. So many of the kids we serve are constantly scanning relationships and asking, am I safe here? What happens if I disappoint you? What happens if I get emotional? What happens if I don't perform correctly? What happens if things get hard? And when mentors can stay calm and flexible and connected and emotionally safe during imperfect moments, kids experience something that's super powerful, and they experience this relationship can survive hard things. That's huge. So let's talk through some more real examples, because I think this becomes easier to understand in actual practical situations. So let's say you do spend all week preparing this amazing activity and you're excited about it, and that's great, and you think the child's going to love it, and then they walk in, glance at it, and they're like, that's boring. Now, internally, you might feel rejected or embarrassed or frustrated. A perfection mindset would say, oh no, I failed. But a trauma responsive mindset says, interesting, this isn't landing the way that I expected. That's very different energy, okay? So instead of forcing the activity because you spent time preparing it, you stay open. You might say, okay, good to know. What sounds more fun today? Or, you're really not feeling this one, huh? And now the child experiences this flexibility, voice, collaboration. The relationship stays intact. Or maybe you ask a child, what do you want to do today? And they shrug and they're like, I don't know. And you offer some ideas and still nothing. Sometimes mentors panic in these moments because they feel responsible for making the session successful. But trauma responsive mentors understand something important. Many children who have experienced abuse, neglect, or abandonment, or instability never had the luxury of exploring who they were. They were just focused on survival, so they learned stay invisible, don't have needs, don't inconvenience adults, figure out what other people want from you. So when you ask, what are you into, they genuinely may not know. That's not resistance, that's information. And now, instead of forcing an answer, the mentor can become curious. Maybe today becomes an exploration session. Maybe you try different things together. Maybe you notice what lights them up. Maybe you simply create safety around not knowing yet. That's still mentorship. Another example, let's say you're doing a structured activity and the child suddenly gets frustrated because they can't do it perfectly. Maybe they lose a game. Maybe they make a mistake. Maybe they just shut down. A non-responsive reaction might be, it's not a big deal, come on, you're fine. But a trauma-responsive mentor slows down and notices the moment, wow, this got really frustrating. Do you want help or do you want space for a minute? I wonder if it feels hard when things don't go the way that we hoped. Now the mentor isn't trying to erase discomfort, they're helping the child move through it safely. That's emotional development. And honestly, these are the golden nugget moments in mentorship. The moments that mentors often want to avoid are usually the moments where the deepest growth happens. Because now you're not just doing an activity together, now you're navigating life together. You're modeling. What do I do when things don't go according to plan? How do I regulate? How do I adjust? How do I stay connected? How do I recover? That's the stuff kids carry outside of the program and into adulthood. And I also think that trauma-responsive mentorship takes pressure off mentors in such a healthy way, because confidence doesn't come from always doing it right. Confidence comes from learning. I can handle what comes next. That's true for mentors, and it's true for kids. We make a choice, we get information, we adjust, we make another choice. That's how healthy relationships work. And honestly, when mentors stay responsive instead of perfectionistic, sessions become much more enjoyable too. You stop trying to control every outcome. You become more playful, more curious, more relaxed. And children feel that. Kids can absolutely feel when adults are rigid or anxious or trying to force an experience. And they can also feel when an adult is grounded enough to be like, okay, this isn't working. Let's figure this out together. That creates connection. And over time, all of those imperfect moments become part of the shared history between mentor and mentee, right? Remember when the activity totally failed and we laughed about it? Remember when you got frustrated and we worked through it? Remember when we changed plans and still had a good session? Remember when things got super awkward and we still stuck it out together? That stuff matters, because for many kids who have experienced developmental trauma, relationships have often felt fragile or conditional. And trauma responsive mentorship teaches something different. We don't have to be perfect to stay connected. And honestly, that may be one of the most healing things that a child ever experiences. If you know of a school, a church, or community-based organization that could serve foster and adopted youth through community mentorship, make sure to send them our free webinar at stablemoments.com/webinar. Thank you so much for being a big deal in the life of a child, and until next time.